Close your eyes and visualize this scenario for a moment. You find yourself standing right in the heart of your mother's kitchen on the night before Christmas. You are tied into a stained apron, your fingers are dusted with flour, and just a few feet away in the living room, 24 guests are sharing drinks and loud laughter. Suddenly, your mother marches through the doorway, glares at the completely empty stovetop, and gives you a condescending smirk. She says, "It is only 25 people. Why in the world haven't you started cooking?" That exact scenario was my reality on December 23rd, 2024. But this time, I didn't get into a screaming match. I didn't break down in tears. And I certainly didn't bother explaining that I was the founder and CEO of a $4 million enterprise she knew absolutely nothing about. Instead of all that, I simply offered a polite smile, untied the strings of my apron, and booked a one-way flight straight to Miami. I left behind a spotless, empty kitchen and a massive holiday feast that was never going to materialize. My name is Lily Septon. I am 37 years old, and this is the true story of how I permanently resigned from my role as my family's unpaid servant. If you are tuning into this video right now, please take a second to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below letting me know what part of the world you're watching from. Let me take you back 15 years to my very first Christmas as an official adult. It was December 2009. I was 22 years old, armed with a freshly printed communications degree, and staring down a completely barren job market. The global economy had just crashed, and I found myself right back in my childhood bedroom in Denver, Colorado, firing off hundreds of resumes that seemed to vanish into thin air. I remember the scent of that particular December evening perfectly. The whole house smelled like fresh pine needles and sharp cinnamon. My mother had gone all out, decking the halls with elaborate garlands, flickering candles, and her prized collection of porcelain angels. We were expecting 15 guests for our holiday dinner. The guest list included aunts, uncles, a handful of cousins, and a couple of my father's most important business associates. "Lily, you're handling the dinner," my mother announced, aggressively adjusting a floral arrangement on the dining room table. Notice she didn't ask me, she issued a command. I blinked and looked up from my glowing laptop screen, where I was in the middle of writing my 5th cover letter of the day. The entire dinner? For 15 people? What about Sarah? Sarah has final exams to prepare for. She absolutely cannot be distracted right now. My younger sister, Sarah, was 18 at the time, navigating her freshman year at the University of Colorado. I glanced over at the sofa. She was sprawled out, endlessly scrolling on her cell phone, doing anything but studying. "I really need to finish these job applications," I replied, trying to keep my tone steady. "There is an open marketing position at a local agency I need to apply for." My mother's voice instantly took on that razor-sharp tone, the specific octave that signaled the discussion was officially over. "This is family, Lily. And family always comes first." Looking back, that was the initial red flag. That was the moment I realized we were playing by two completely different rulebooks. Sarah was granted endless exemptions, while I was simply handed chores. I spent the entirety of the next 48 hours trapped in that kitchen. I meticulously roasted a 12-pound turkey, whipped up massive batches of homemade mashed potatoes, baked a green bean casserole, simmered fresh cranberry sauce, baked rolls from scratch, and prepared 2 distinct pies. I polished the good silverware until it gleamed, set the long table, and painstakingly arranged the floral centerpieces. By the time the doorbell rang on Christmas Eve, I was still banished to the kitchen, wearing a cheap apron dotted with brown gravy stains. Through the doorway, I could see my father standing proudly by the fireplace, swirling a glass of expensive scotch. He was busy introducing my sister to his primary business partner, a man named Harold Thompson. "This right here is my youngest, Sarah," my dad boasted loudly. "She is studying marketing over at CU. She's going to take over my entire operation one day." Harold smiled and gave Sarah a firm handshake. "Following right in your father's footsteps." "That is absolutely fantastic to hear." Right at that moment, I hurried past them, balancing a heavy silver platter loaded with hot appetizers. My father let his eyes dart toward me for a fraction of a second, then immediately pivoted back to Harold without uttering a single syllable. That was the second massive red flag. Sarah was actively paraded around as the bright future of the Septon family. I, on the other hand, was completely invisible. Oh my goodness, who prepared these? Harold's wife, Grace, asked as she plucked a warm stuffed mushroom off the tray I had just set down. These are absolutely phenomenal. Oh, that's just Lily, my mother chimed in, flicking her wrist in the air as if swatting away a fly. She has plenty of free time for cooking these days. Still hasn't found a job. Grace offered me a soft, sympathetic smile, but I was already making my escape back behind the swinging kitchen doors. That exact dynamic became the blueprint for every single holiday that followed. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter Sunday, my parents' milestone anniversaries, random birthdays, it didn't matter. I was perpetually stationed behind a hot stove, setting up folding chairs, or scrubbing dried food off plates long after everyone else had gone to bed. Meanwhile, Sarah was permanently seated at the head of the table, turning on the charm, schmoozing with guests, and being treated like the crown jewel. By the time 2012 rolled around, I had officially launched my very own event planning agency. I named it Stellar Events. It turned out I had an incredible knack for managing chaotic logistics, negotiating with stubborn vendors, and designing unforgettable guest experiences. Ironically, I had mastered every single one of those high-pressure skills while sweating over my parents' kitchen sink. But the day I excitedly shared my new business venture with my mother, she didn't even bother lifting her eyes from the pages of her lifestyle magazine. Event planning, she muttered. You mean like throwing little birthday parties for toddlers? Actually, Mom, no. I mean corporate retreats, major product launches, charity galas, and industry conferences. Well, that's nice, dear, she sighed. Hey, could you remember to pick up my dry cleaning on your way home today? She never brought it up again. My father never asked about it. Sarah couldn't have cared less. So, I made a conscious choice to shut my mouth and stop trying to impress them. For the next 12 years, I poured my blood, sweat, and tears into Stellar Events in absolute silence. I scored my first massive contract back in 2014, a fast-growing tech startup that handed me an $8,000 check to orchestrate their launch gala. By 2018, my little solo venture had expanded to include 5 full-time employees and a gorgeous office space right in the heart of downtown Denver. By the time 2022 hit, I was the go-to event coordinator for multiple Fortune 500 corporations. Yet, whenever I pulled up to my parents' driveway for a family gathering, I deliberately wore faded denim jeans and an oversized, cheap sweater. I left my brand new Audi parked at home and drove my beat-up, decade-old Honda. I never once breathed a word about the 23 full-time staff members relying on me for their livelihoods, nor did I mention the jaw-dropping $4.2 million in gross revenue my agency pulled in during 2024 alone. Why hide it? Because they never bothered to ask, and quite frankly, I was utterly exhausted from offering up pieces of my life only to watch them get trampled on. Last Thanksgiving, November of 2024, was a particularly bruising experience. Just hours before arriving, I had finalized a massive contract with a luxury hotel conglomerate. The deal was worth a staggering $600,000. I walked through my parents' front door feeling physically drained but emotionally euphoric, completely riding the high of monumental professional success. I barely got my coat off before my mother shoved a stained apron into my chest. The turkey requires basting every 30 minutes, she instructed. I printed out a schedule for you. I had 23 professionals reporting to me. I sat across boardroom tables negotiating high-stakes contracts with corporate CEOs. I had recently been featured in 3 prestigious industry magazines. And my own mother had just handed me a laminated poultry basting schedule. I swallowed my pride. I took the apron. I basted the damn bird. I plated and served a massive dinner to 18 people while listening to Sarah dramatically complain about her high-stress role as the marketing director at my father's firm. A lucrative title she had been spoon-fed without a single day of competitive interviewing. Sarah is doing absolutely brilliant work, my dad announced, clinking his glass. Overall company revenue is up 12% this year thanks to her. I bit my tongue. I could have easily announced that my own company's revenue had skyrocketed by 31% over the same period. But honestly, what would be the point? They would just dig deep to find a way to belittle it. They always did. Later that night, as I stood elbow deep in lukewarm, greasy dishwater, a sudden moment of absolute clarity washed over me. I made a silent vow. This was going to be my final holiday playing the role of the Septon family servant. I had no idea how I was going to shatter the cycle, but I knew deep in my bones that I could not endure another year of this toxic charade. A decade and a half of being treated like an invisible maid was my absolute limit. I grabbed a towel, dried my hands, draped the apron over a chair, and drove back to my luxury apartment, a place my family had never once laid eyes on because they had never cared enough to ask for my address. Exactly 2 weeks later, on the morning of December 22nd, my cell phone lit up with a notification that would alter the trajectory of my entire life. It was a message from Victoria Caldwell, the formidable CEO of Meridian Holdings. It was 9:47 a.m. I was sitting at my massive desk in the corner office of Stellar Events, casually watching thick snowflakes drift past the towering floor-to-ceiling glass windows. The Denver skyline was sparkling under the pale winter sunlight, and my workspace was buried under piles of catering contracts, digital seating charts, and a lukewarm mug of dark roast coffee. My CFO and closest confidant, Marcus Rivera, tapped gently on my glass door. Marcus was 51 years old, sported distinguished silver hair, and possessed the unflappable aura of a man who had navigated 100 corporate disasters and walked away without a scratch. He had been my guiding light since 2015, back when Stellar Events consisted solely of me hyperventilating over a cheap laptop. "You are going to want to look at this right now," he stated, sliding his digital tablet directly across my desk. I leaned forward and scanned the screen. It was an email originating straight from the desk of Victoria Caldwell. For context, Meridian Holdings was a monstrous hospitality and commercial real estate empire valued at roughly $3.8 billion. The subject line read, "Partnership Proposal, Exclusive Event Services 2025. I had to read the words on the screen at least 2 times, blinking hard, just to guarantee that my exhausted brain wasn't projecting some wild, sleep-deprived hallucination. Meridian Holdings wanted to lock down Stellar Events with an exclusive, ironclad contract. They wanted us to handle every single corporate function, high-stakes client dinner, new product launch, and massive investor gala for the entirety of the upcoming calendar year. They had already thoroughly vetted our portfolio, interrogated our professional references, and wrapped up their internal due diligence. The guaranteed value of the proposed contract? A cool $2.1 million. Is this actually real? I whispered, miraculously keeping my voice much steadier than my shaking hands. Marcus gave a slow, deliberate nod. I just got off the phone with their internal legal department to verify. It is very real. But, of course, there is a catch. In this industry, there was always a catch. Victoria Caldwell insists on meeting you face-to-face before she puts her signature on anything. She operates old school. She absolutely refuses to do million-dollar business with anyone she hasn't looked straight in the eye. Marcus took a deep breath. The mandatory meeting is locked in for December 24th at 11 a.m. sharp. At their global headquarters. Down in Miami. December 24th? I echoed. That's Christmas Eve. Is there any way we can push it back? Victoria is flying out to her estate in Switzerland on the 26th. She won't touch American soil again until the middle of January. Marcus leaned his palms on my desk, looking me dead in the eyes. Lily, if we do not get ink on this paper by the 24th, they are immediately pivoting to their backup option. Lux Affairs has been aggressively pitching them for 6 months. Lux Affairs. My agency's most ruthless, cutthroat competitor. They had spent the entire year trying to poach my biggest clients out from under me. Suddenly, the true weight of the situation crashed down on my shoulders. This was no longer just about securing a massive paycheck. This was about planting a flag. Meridian Holdings was the golden goose, the exact type of legendary client that effortlessly kicked down locked industry doors. Earning their corporate stamp of approval meant instant referrals to their billionaire investors, their luxury partners, and their vast, untouchable network. It meant Stellar Events would finally explode out of Colorado and plant roots in the lucrative Florida market. It was the leap from being a respected regional player to a dominant national powerhouse. Conversely, if I let Luck's affairs snatch this away, the shockwaves would be devastating. Current clients would start whispering. They would wonder what fatal flaw Meridian saw in us. The pristine reputation I had sacrificed my 20s and 30s to build could begin to crumble. There is actually one more thing you need to see, Marcus added softly, swiping his finger to pull up a secondary email. Victoria explicitly referenced your recent feature in Forbes. I scrolled down the tablet screen, and there it was, a single sentence that literally stole the air from my lungs. I was profoundly impressed by your recent profile in Forbes' 30 Under 40 Event Entrepreneurs list. Your innovative approach to sustainable event design perfectly aligns with Meridian's corporate ethos. I very much look forward to meeting the brilliant woman behind stellar events. That Forbes magazine feature had dropped back in October. A reporter had grilled me for 2 solid hours. A professional photographer had done a full shoot right here in my corner office, and they had quoted me extensively on the future of corporate hospitality. The final published piece had famously dubbed me a quiet force reshaping corporate gatherings. I hadn't shown the article to a single member of my family. Honestly, what would have been the point? My mother would have zeroed in on my outfit and complained that the lighting made me look haggard. My father would have immediately tried to compare my profit margins to his construction business. Sarah would have just rolled her eyes and changed the subject. But Victoria Caldwell, a billionaire CEO, had read every word. And Victoria Caldwell was impressed. Book the flight, I commanded. Marcus was already tapping furiously on his tablet. Consider it done. You are on a flight out of Denver tomorrow night, December 23rd, departing at 8:45 p.m. You'll touch down in Miami around 1:30 a.m. I've secured a luxury suite at the Fontainebleau Hotel. The boardroom meeting is at 11 a.m. sharp. I nodded, feeling that incredibly potent cocktail of raw adrenaline and stomach-churning anxiety that always accompanied a massive career milestone. But this time, a darker, heavier emotion was swirling right beneath the surface. My cell phone violently vibrated against the desk. It was a text message from my mother. Call me. Important. I sat back and stared at those 3 aggressive words. In my 3.5 decades of existence, the word important coming from my mother only ever meant one of 2 things. Either somebody was on their deathbed, or she urgently needed to extract some kind of free labor out of me. Considering no one had mentioned any sudden hospitalizations, I was heavily betting on option 2. A smart woman would have swiped the notification away. I should have completely blocked out the noise and zeroed in on the most pivotal business opportunity of my entire life. But undoing 15 solid years of intense psychological conditioning doesn't happen in an afternoon. That deeply ingrained inner child, the pathetic daughter who still desperately craved a crumb of parental validation, who still foolishly hoped that maybe this time things would be different, took the bait. I picked up the phone. I hit the call button. She picked up before the first ring even finished. Finally, she snapped. I have literally been attempting to get a hold of you all morning. I glanced at the clock. It was exactly 10:15 a.m., and she had sent exactly 1 text message. What is going on, Mom? I asked, forcing my voice to remain impossibly flat. Our Christmas Eve plans have undergone a major shift. Sarah's high-profile friends are going to be joining us this year. We are now expecting 25 people in total. 25 people. In my professional life, managing 25 VIPs was a walk in the park. In my personal life, that number sent a spike of pure dread straight through my chest. That is quite a large group, I replied cautiously. Exactly. Which is precisely why I require you to be over here bright and early tomorrow morning. You need to handle the cooking, the table staging, the decorating, the works. Sarah is far too overwhelmed with her corporate duties to help out. And boom, there it was. My knuckles turned white as I gripped the phone. Through the transparent walls of my office, I could clearly see Marcus observing me, his face drawn with deep concern. Mom, I absolutely cannot do that. I have a major business trip. A business trip? On Christmas Eve, she scoffed. It is incredibly important. I am flying down to Miami tomorrow evening. She let out a harsh, barking laugh. She actually laughed at me. Miami? For what exactly? Some cute little children's party you're trying to organize? Some cute little party. Try a $2.1 million exclusive contract. The crowning achievement of my career. It is a highly significant meeting with a major corporate client, I insisted. Lily, please, she groaned dramatically. We both know your little freelance side hustle can be put on hold. This is your family. There was that toxic, manipulative word again. Family. The exact weapon she unsheathed every single time she needed to force me into submission. I cannot cancel this trip, Mom. Cannot, or simply will not. I ground my teeth together. Both. A thick, suffocating silence blanketed the phone line. Then, I heard it, the sharp, dramatic intake of breath that always preceded the ultimate maternal guilt trip. Do you possess any idea how hard I have labored to make this holiday perfect? She hissed. Your sister Sarah has been under immense, crushing pressure at her job. She desperately needs this celebration to go smoothly. And her invited guests are highly influential individuals. They are critical colleagues and lucrative potential clients for your father's business. This is not just a casual family dinner, Lily. This is vital corporate networking. Networking for Sarah. Networking for Dad. Never, ever for me. Mom, I hear what you are saying, but right now you're acting incredibly selfish. Her tone plummeted to absolute sub-zero. I am selfish? You're the one who has always been selfish, Lily. Sarah constantly gives and gives to this family, and you can't even be bothered to cook one simple meal. I shut my eyes tightly. 15 agonizing years of having this exact same cyclical argument. 15 years of being labeled as a selfish monster simply because I dared to enforce a basic boundary. Selfish for having an independent life. Selfish for daring to exist outside of their microscopic, insulting expectations of me. My final answer is no, I said. What did you just say to me? I said no, Mom. I will not be there tomorrow morning. I will not be slaving over a stove cooking a massive dinner for 25 people. I have an executive meeting that cannot, under any circumstances, be rescheduled. My mother's voice devolved into a venomous hiss. What imaginary little meeting could possibly be more important than your own flesh and blood? A legally binding contract worth over $2 million, I stated clearly. The line went completely dead silent. Just for a split second. In that tiny fraction of time, my foolish heart fluttered, thinking that maybe, just maybe, the sheer magnitude of that number had finally broken through her delusion. Maybe she finally understood. Then she laughed again. It was a cold, dismissive, profoundly cruel sound. $2 million. Lily, honestly, where do you conjure up these absurd fantasies? You coordinate little corporate get-togethers. You are not some high-rolling business mogul. Something deep inside the core of my chest violently cracked. It didn't break, it fractured. A massive, jagged fissure that had been slowly spiderwebbing through my soul for 15 years finally ruptured completely. You don't know the first thing about what I actually do, I whispered fiercely. I know more than enough, she fired back. I know that you are 37 years old, completely unmarried, and possess zero actual career prospects. I know that you have squandered your best years on this pathetic hobby while your younger sister went out and built an actual, respectable future. And I know that when your family genuinely needs you, you are nowhere to be found. Every single syllable hit my face like a physical backhand. The words were meticulously calculated, hyper-precise, and engineered to inflict maximum emotional damage. Outside my door, Marcus slowly stood up from his desk, watching me intently through the glass. He had been a silent witness to enough of these toxic phone calls over the past decade to recognize the familiar signs of an impending emotional collapse. I am going to Miami, I said, my voice eerily calm. You are going to have to figure out how to feed 25 people without me. If you walk out on this family tomorrow, do not ever bother coming back, she screamed. Any normal person would have felt their world completely shatter in that moment. Instead, a bizarre, euphoric sensation flooded my veins. Pure, unadulterated relief. Goodbye, Mom. I pressed the red button and ended the call. For a long, silent minute, I just sat perfectly still in my leather chair, phone clutched in my hand, staring blankly out at the snow falling over the Denver skyline. My pulse was hammering in my throat, but my brain felt incredibly, blissfully quiet. Marcus quietly pushed the door open and stepped inside. "Are you all right?" She aggressively demanded that I cancel the Miami trip so I could stay home and cook a massive holiday dinner for 25 guests, I said hollowly. Marcus slowly shook his head in disbelief. "And when you told her absolutely not?" "She ordered me to never bother coming back to the family." Marcus pulled out the guest chair and sat down across from me. He had been riding shotgun with me since the gritty early days, back when stellar events was nothing more than a pipe dream fueled by cheap caffeine and a complex Excel spreadsheet. He had personally watched me construct a multi-million-dollar empire from the ground up, all while my own flesh and blood publicly dismissed it as a cute little hobby. "Lily, look at me," he said firmly. "I have known you for 9 years. I have watched you ruthlessly negotiate million-dollar vendor contracts. I have seen you put out massive logistical fires that would literally break seasoned professionals in half. You are, without a doubt, one of the most terrifyingly capable corporate executives I have ever had the privilege of working alongside." He took a breath. "But the second you deal with your family, you instantly morph into somebody else. You shrink yourself. You become small." I dropped my gaze to the desk. He was entirely right. "This is your defining moment," Marcus told me. "You can continue to compress yourself into this tiny box to appease their delusions, or you can boldly walk your own path. But you cannot survive doing both." My phone vibrated violently against the wood. It was a text message from my sister, Sarah. "Mom is literally in tears right now. Thanks a lot, Lily. You really couldn't put your family first for just one single day? You are so unimaginably selfish." My thumbs hovered over the glass screen. I typed out, "I have mandatory, high-level work commitments." Her reply shot back before I could even blink. "Work? What actual work? You blow up balloons for birthday parties. Get over yourself." I stared at the glowing pixels. I could have drafted a massive paragraph. I could have aggressively defended my empire. I could have hurled the $2.1 million contract right in her digital face. Instead, I swiped left and permanently deleted the entire text thread. "Make sure the flight is booked," I told Marcus, looking back up. "I am going to Miami." A proud smile spread across his face as he stood up and headed for the door. Right before he exited, he paused. "Lily, you are making the absolute right call here. For whatever that's worth." It was worth everything. Later that evening, I drove back to my actual home, a stunning, 2-bedroom industrial loft located in the trendy Lohi neighborhood that ran me $3,000 a month in rent. It featured gorgeous exposed brick walls and a breathtaking, unobstructed view of the Rocky Mountains. It was a beautiful sanctuary that my family had never once stepped foot inside, simply because they had never cared to ask if they could. I pulled out my sleek carry-on suitcase and began packing. I folded sharp, tailored professional suits for the boardroom, comfortable athleisure for the long flight, my heavy laptop, copies of the Meridian contracts, glossy presentation decks, and exactly one personal item. I packed the October issue of Forbes magazine, featuring my face printed boldly on page 47. I honestly couldn't tell you exactly why I packed it. Maybe I viewed it as a shield of armor. Maybe I needed hard, physical evidence to remind my own brain that I wasn't clinically insane, that I had genuinely built a sprawling, successful reality completely separate from my family's toxic fiction. At exactly 8:45 p.m. on the night of December 23rd, my commercial flight blasted off the runway at Denver International Airport, violently shaking as it sliced through the heavy winter snow clouds, pointing its nose toward the warm coast of Miami. Thousands of feet below me, my parents and sister were undoubtedly sitting in their pristine living room, furiously complaining about my absence. Let them complain. Let them be furious. I had a multi-million-dollar future to secure. The air travel from Denver down to Miami takes roughly 4 hours. I burned through the vast majority of the flight intensely studying the Meridian contract, scribbling aggressive notes in the margins, and running mental simulations of every brutal question Victoria Caldwell might throw at me. But right around the stroke of midnight, somewhere thousands of feet above the state of Texas, I unzipped my bag and pulled out the Forbes magazine. The glossy cover featured some brilliant tech innovator I didn't recognize. But flipping to page 47, there I was. A massive, full-page, high-resolution photograph of me standing powerfully in my corner office, arms crossed tightly over my chest, the iconic Denver skyline looming behind me. The bold headline read, "Lily Septon, the quiet force behind stellar events." I let my eyes scan the opening paragraph for what felt like the 100th time. In a chaotic industry heavily dominated by aggressively loud personalities and flashy, shameless self-promotion, Lily Septon has quietly constructed a massive $4 million event empire through her meticulous, almost obsessive attention to detail and an almost preternatural ability to anticipate her high-end clients' every need. "I don't believe in showing off," Septon notes from her sprawling corner office in downtown Denver. "I simply believe in showing up." The extensive article took a deep dive into my agency's explosive growth trajectory, our unprecedented 93% client retention rate, and our massive pivot into eco-friendly, sustainable event practices. It even featured direct quotes from 3 separate corporate CEOs who went on the record calling me completely indispensable and the absolute best in the business. And my own blood relatives had absolutely zero clue that this magazine even existed. There had been a brief, fleeting moment back in October when I genuinely considered showing it to them. It lasted about 5 minutes. I played the tape forward and accurately predicted my mother's immediate reaction. She would undoubtedly hyper-focus on the shadows under my eyes and tell me I looked exhausted. She would critique my lack of heavy makeup. She would instantly pivot the conversation to remind everyone that one of Sarah's sorority sisters was once featured in a local newsletter, so being in a magazine really wasn't that big of an accomplishment. So I buried it. I slid the magazine safely back into my carry-on as the heavy aircraft began its steep descent. Peering out the tiny window, the sprawling, neon-lit grid of Miami looked like thousands of crushed diamonds scattered across black velvet. That familiar, intoxicating rush of pre-negotiation adrenaline began flooding my system. The second the plane's wheels kissed the tarmac, my phone aggressively buzzed. It was a brand new email originating directly from Victoria Caldwell, timestamped at 11:47 p.m. Subject: Contract final signing. MH202412223. Dear Ms. Septon, I am just reaching out to formally confirm our face-to-face meeting tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. sharp. Please ensure you bring 2 valid forms of government identification for the notarization process. My internal legal team will have the finalized, bound contracts prepared for our signatures. I have also attached our standard corporate NDA and preliminary terms for your review. If you require anything urgently, my executive assistant can be reached at the direct line below. I very much look forward to finally meeting the brilliant woman behind stellar events. Best regards. Victoria Caldwell, CEO, Meridian Holdings. I immediately favorited the email. Then, completely driven by paranoia, I took a digital screenshot and backed that up to the cloud as well. Gathering ironclad proof was simply the survival mechanism of a woman who had been trained to believe that spoken words meant absolutely nothing without physical evidence to back them up. The Fontainebleau Hotel was everything its legendary reputation promised. It was a sprawling masterpiece of Art Deco elegance, dripping with old money, featuring breathtaking oceanfront views and a massive lobby that subtly whispered extreme wealth. I finally checked into my suite at 2 in the morning, practically collapsed face-first into the massive king-sized mattress, and slept like the dead for 6 uninterrupted hours. When my eyes finally fluttered open on the morning of December 24th, my phone screen was glowing with an absolute nightmare of notifications. I had 11 unread text messages waiting for me. 4 from my mother, 3 from Sarah, 2 from my father, and 2 from random, unknown numbers that were almost certainly extended relatives I actively avoided. I didn't open a single one of them. Instead, I took a long, hot shower, meticulously dressed myself in my sharpest, custom-tailored charcoal power suit, and rigorously reviewed my legal notes one final time. At 10:30 a.m., I slid into the back of a black Uber and was driven straight to the global headquarters of Meridian Holdings. It was a terrifyingly massive glass monolith located right in the heart of the Brickell Financial District, reflecting the bright December sunlight like a massive corporate beacon. I marched up to the front desk. The receptionist carefully inspected my driver's license and handed me a heavy, magnetic visitor badge. Miss Caldwell is eagerly expecting you. Please proceed directly to the 40th floor. The rapid elevator ride felt like it was stretching into eternity. My heart was practically attempting to crack my ribs open. This was the defining moment. This was the single meeting that was going to fundamentally rewrite my future. But as the digital numbers above the elevator doors climbed higher and higher, my phone vibrated in my pocket. This time, it was an incoming call. Sarah. I instantly hit decline. A few seconds later, it buzzed again. A new voicemail notification. Operating entirely against my own better judgment, I raised the phone to my ear and hit play. Lily, it's Sarah. Mom is having a complete, total psychological meltdown. Literally none of the premium caterers in the city will answer the phone or come out on Christmas Eve. Surprise, surprise. Dad is desperately calling in massive favors from his network, but absolutely no one can bail us out. Victoria Caldwell is supposed to be arriving at our house for dinner tonight, and we have literally zero food to serve her. This absolute catastrophe is 100% your fault. If you had just done your job. I violently hit pause on the audio track. I rewound the audio and played one specific sentence again. Victoria Caldwell is supposed to be arriving at our house for dinner tonight. I stood completely frozen, staring blankly at my glowing phone screen as the elevator let out a soft ding and the doors slid open. Victoria Caldwell, the billionaire CEO of Meridian Holdings. The ultra-powerful woman I was quite literally seconds away from meeting face-to-face to sign a $2 million contract. She was going to my parents' house for Christmas dinner tonight. How in the world was that mathematically possible? I stepped out onto a breathtaking, sprawling marble foyer. An impossibly polished woman wearing a sharp navy dress immediately approached me, flashing a brilliant corporate smile. Good morning, Miss Upton. Miss Caldwell is fully prepared for you. Please step right this way. I numbly followed her down a massive, silent corridor lined end-to-end with crystal awards and framed photographs of luxury properties. My brain was completely short-circuiting. Victoria Caldwell personally knew my parents. Or, at the very least, she had been formally invited to their inner circle dinner party, which essentially meant she possessed a direct connection to either Sarah or my father. Someone in Denver had undoubtedly connected them, probably through overlapping commercial real estate circles. Denver's corporate elite wasn't exactly a massive pond. Did Victoria Caldwell realize that I was Richard Septon's daughter? Did she have any inkling that the affluent family she was planning to dine with this evening was the exact same family I had just ruthlessly abandoned? The assistant pushed open a set of heavy mahogany doors, revealing a massive corner conference room. Gigantic floor-to-ceiling glass panes offered a sweeping, panoramic view of the sparkling Biscayne Bay. A colossal wooden table dominated the center of the room, completely covered in thick stacks of legal documents. And standing powerfully at the head of that table was Victoria Caldwell. She appeared to be in her early 50s, sporting impeccably styled silver hair and possessing the razor-sharp, calculating eyes of a woman who had violently ripped an empire out of thin air. She was dressed in a pristine cream blazer accented by simple, elegant pearl earrings. She closed the distance and extended her hand. Her grip was like a vice. Miss Upton, it is an absolute pleasure to finally meet you in person. The pleasure is entirely mine, Miss Caldwell, I replied, matching her firm grip. She gracefully gestured toward a plush leather chair. Shall we dive right in? I have a long flight out to Denver scheduled for this afternoon. Denver. My stomach instantly tied itself into a massive, agonizing knot. I slowly lowered myself into the chair, cracked open my leather portfolio, and mentally braced myself to sign the largest, most vital contract of my entire life, all while desperately attempting to block out the horrifying mental image of what was going to transpire when Victoria Caldwell knocked on my parents' front door later that night. Before I dive into the explosive finale of what happened next, I want to take a brief pause and ask you a direct question. Have you ever been severely overlooked by your own blood relatives? Have they ever casually dismissed your massive successes, intentionally ignored your hard-earned achievements, or intentionally made you feel completely invisible? If you can relate to that, I want you to type 1 down in the comments section right now. And if you have ever boldly stood up for yourself and enforced strict boundaries, type 2. Also, please, if you want to find out exactly what went down when Victoria Caldwell walked into my parents' disastrous living room, smash that like button and hit subscribe. Okay, back to the chaos. The aggressive contract negotiation and signing process consumed exactly 45 minutes. Victoria Caldwell was terrifyingly thorough. She methodically reviewed every single complex clause, fired off hyper-pointed questions regarding our massive logistical capacity, rigorously questioned our vendor supply chains, and demanded a breakdown of our emergency contingency protocols. I fired back an answer for every single question with the icy, unshakable confidence of a woman who had spent 12 grueling years preparing for this exact conversation. At exactly 11:52 a.m., we both dragged our customized pens across the final page of contract number MH20241223. A corporate photographer stepped into the room, snapping high-resolution photos of Victoria and me shaking hands with the breathtaking Miami skyline glittering through the glass behind us. Her assistant swiftly notarized the massive stack of documents and slid my personal copy across the table inside a heavy leather folder deeply embossed with the Meridian Holdings corporate logo. "Welcome to the Meridian family," Victoria announced, offering a surprisingly warm, genuine smile. "I have a very strong feeling that this is going to morph into an exceptionally lucrative partnership." "I couldn't possibly agree more," I replied. We exchanged a handful of polite corporate pleasantries, and just as things were wrapping up, her assistant gently tapped her watch, offering a hushed reminder about her impending flight schedule. "I am actually spending my Christmas Eve with some new business associates up in Denver," Victoria casually mentioned as she expertly gathered her designer belongings. "The Septon family. Do you happen to know them by any chance?" Richard operates a rather large construction supply firm. His young daughter, Sarah, is reportedly quite the impressive talent. My throat instantly felt like it was filled with dry sand. "I have heard the name around town," I managed to choke out. "Richard is a highly lucrative potential investor for a massive real estate project we are currently developing. His wife practically begged me to attend their intimate Christmas dinner." Victoria let out a light, airy laugh. "Normally, I strictly decline these sorts of personal invitations, but I am genuinely curious about their internal operation. Plus, I have been reliably informed that the food they serve is absolutely spectacular." The food. The spectacular food that I was supposed to have spent the last 48 hours cooking. I forcefully bit the inside of my cheek to maintain a completely neutral, deadpan expression. "I sincerely hope you enjoy your evening." Victoria paused right at the threshold of the heavy doors. She turned back around, studying my face with those intensely sharp, calculating eyes. "You know, there is something remarkably familiar about you, Miss Septon. The surname, perhaps. Are you of any direct relation to the Denver Septons?" This was the critical crossroad. I could have easily spilled everything right then and there. I could have laid out the fact that Richard and Margaret were my biological parents, that Sarah was my younger sister, that I had literally sacrificed 15 years of my life acting as their unpaid, disrespected catering staff while silently constructing the massive company she had just dumped $2 million into. But I didn't say a word. "It is a remarkably common name," I said softly instead. Victoria nodded slowly, seemingly perfectly satisfied with the misdirection, and vanished through the doors. I remained frozen in that massive, empty conference room for a long time after the echoes of her heels faded away. The freshly inked contract felt incredibly heavy in my trembling hands. She truly didn't know. She had absolutely zero clue that the legendary, spectacular culinary feast she was expecting at the Septon Christmas dinner was supposed to have been completely prepared by my hands. The exact same hands that had just inked her multi-million-dollar deal. She had no idea that the affluent family she was about to go break bread with had spent a decade and a half casually dismissing my life's work as a pathetic joke. And tonight, when she confidently strolled into my parents' sprawling home and was met with no cooked dinner, no professional catering staff, and no magical holiday spread miraculously appearing out of thin air, what on earth was going to happen? A very dark, incredibly petty fragment of my soul desperately wanted a front-row seat to the carnage. I wanted to actively watch my arrogant mother scramble in a blind panic. I wanted to witness my father fumble through pathetic excuses. I wanted to see my sister's carefully curated, fake corporate persona completely disintegrate in real time. But a much larger, surprisingly mature part of my soul just felt an overwhelming sense of bone-deep exhaustion. I was completely finished with the toxic theatrical drama. I was done being violently yanked into their chaotic orbit. I was done utilizing their twisted reactions as a measuring stick for my own self-worth. I had secured exactly what I came for. The contract was signed in blood. My company's financial future was guaranteed. Whatever catastrophic nightmare was about to unfold back in Colorado tonight was officially no longer my circus, and those were no longer my monkeys. I boarded a flight back to Colorado that very same afternoon, touching down on the snowy tarmac in Denver at precisely 6:47 p.m., the exact minute the legendary Septon Christmas dinner was scheduled to kick off. I grabbed my bags, slid into the back of an Uber, rode silently back to my luxury apartment, ordered a massive spread of spicy Thai takeout, and completely powered down my cell phone. For the first time in 15 agonizing years, I spent my Christmas Eve entirely alone. And it was the most profoundly peaceful night of my life. I obviously had no idea what apocalyptic events were unfolding at my parents' house at that exact moment. I wouldn't receive the full, unvarnished debrief until the following morning. But I can vividly paint the picture for you right now because I eventually pieced the entire timeline together from the jaw-dropping accounts provided by Grace Thompson and 2 other traumatized guests who were actually in the room. Let's rewind to 5:30 p.m. that evening. Margaret Septon confidently strutted into her massive kitchen, fully expecting to be greeted by the usual spread of perfectly plated appetizers, a massive roasting turkey dripping with juices, and expensive pots bubbling away on every single burner. Instead, she walked into a ghost town. The stainless steel appliances were ice cold. The marble countertops were completely barren. And there was no Lily. Richard. Her frantic, shrill voice aggressively echoed through the massive hallways. Richard, get in here. My father rushed into the room, still casually adjusting his expensive silk tie. What is wrong? Where is all the food? Where is Lily? I thought you explicitly told me she was handling the catering, he demanded. She was, my mother shrieked. She was supposed to be here prepping hours ago. Sarah suddenly came charging down the grand staircase, poured into a skin-tight red cocktail dress. What on earth is going on down here? Why is everyone screaming? Your selfish sister has completely abandoned us, my mother yelled. There is zero dinner. The subsequent 60 minutes devolved into absolute, unfiltered pandemonium. My parents desperately dialed every single luxury catering company in the greater Denver metro area. Every single one was either completely booked out or entirely shut down for the holiday. They made a frantic, tire-screeching dash to the nearest premium grocery store, only to discover the prepared hot food section had been scavenged down to the bare metal. My father furiously dialed 3 different high-end restaurant owners, trying to leverage his corporate weight, but all 3 politely told him they couldn't help him. By the time the grandfather clock struck 6 p.m. and the first wave of elite guests began walking through the front door, the legendary Septon dining table proudly displayed the following feast: 2 lukewarm, store-bought rotisserie chickens still in their plastic domes, 3 bags of pre-washed, untossed iceberg salad, a massive generic cheese platter hurriedly purchased from Costco, and a dozen cheap dinner rolls that hadn't even been removed from their plastic sleeves. Grace Thompson, the exact same woman who had kindly complimented my stuffed mushrooms a decade and a half ago, stood dead in the center of the living room, slowly scanning the horrifying culinary display. Margaret, dear, is everything quite all right? Grace asked delicately. You seem incredibly flustered. Everything is absolutely perfect, my mother aggressively chirped, her fake smile stretching so wide it looked painful. We just encountered a microscopic catering snafu. Tiny last-minute adjustments. 25 high-net-worth individuals mingled in profound, agonizing awkwardness. The massive house looked straight out of a magazine, decorated to absolute perfection, but the pathetic pile of food practically screamed failure. This was light years away from the sophisticated, elite dinner party my mother had arrogantly promised. It was a catastrophic disaster desperately trying to hide behind twinkling Christmas lights. Then, at exactly 7:15 p.m., the doorbell rang. Victoria Caldwell had arrived. She gracefully swept into the tense living room carrying the undeniable, gravitational pull of a woman accustomed to commanding entire boardrooms. The light caught her pearl earrings as she confidently shook my father's sweating hand, politely praised my mother's frantic decorations, and exchanged stiff pleasantries with a visibly panicked Sarah. "Thank you so much for extending the invitation," Victoria said smoothly. "I have heard truly wonderful rumors about your legendary Christmas dinners." My mother's face twitched violently. "Yes. Well, this particular year is a slight departure from the norm. We ran into some unexpected operational challenges." Victoria casually let her sharp gaze drift toward the dining room, where the two sad, sweating rotisserie chickens sat in their tragic splendor. Her facial expression remained locked in polite, corporate neutrality, but I can only imagine she was internally recalculating her entire assessment of the Septon family's basic competence. My father desperately attempted to aggressively steer the conversation back toward real estate investments. My mother began pouring massive, heavy glasses of red wine to essentially sedate the crowd. My sister frantically worked the edges of the room, loudly trying to distract people from the glaring lack of food. And then it happened. Grace Thompson inadvertently dropped the bomb that would completely obliterate the Septon family facade. Grace had been casually standing in the corner, mindlessly scrolling through her cell phone, likely browsing LinkedIn or Instagram, when she suddenly froze. "Oh my dear God," Grace gasped, her voice echoing loudly enough to silence the immediate area. "Richard. Margaret. You absolutely must come look at this right now." Grace held her glowing phone high in the air. Displayed on the screen was a massive LinkedIn update that had been pushed live just a few hours prior. It featured a crystal-clear photograph of Victoria Caldwell warmly shaking hands with a younger woman. The bold caption beneath the photo read, "Absolutely thrilled to announce our massive exclusive partnership with at Stellar Events and the brilliant, visionary CEO, Lily Septon. We are looking forward to an incredibly lucrative 2025. Hashtag Meridian Holdings, hashtag event planning, hashtag Forbes under 40. Grace looked up, her face a mask of total confusion. "Wait a second. Lily Septon? Isn't that your daughter Lily?" The massive living room essentially flatlined. The ambient background chatter didn't completely die out, and the soft Christmas jazz was still pumping through the hidden speakers, but within the inner circle surrounding Grace, the silence was suffocating. My mother stared blankly at the glowing screen, the color rapidly draining from her face until she looked physically ill. My father leaned forward, squinting aggressively at the photo. "What exactly is this?" my dad stammered. "Is this some sort of internet mistake?" "That is literally Lily," Grace insisted, using her fingers to zoom in heavily on my face. "That is your daughter, Lily," shaking hands with Victoria Caldwell inside what appears to be a very expensive corporate office. Hearing her own name, Victoria Caldwell elegantly stepped through the crowd and peered down at the phone screen. Her polite expression rapidly morphed. First came instant recognition, followed closely by genuine shock, and finally settling into an expression that I can only describe as utterly delighted, predatory amusement. "Lily Septon," Victoria said, drawing out the syllables slowly. "Your daughter is Lily Septon, the founder and CEO of Stellar Events." My mother's jaw dropped open, snapped shut, and then dropped open again like a suffocating fish. Yes, Lily is our eldest daughter. But I am completely failing to understand. What on earth is Stellar Events?" Victoria let out a loud, booming laugh. It was a rich, genuine sound that violently sliced right through the thick tension. "Margaret, Stellar Events is widely recognized as one of the most dominantly successful corporate event planning empires in the entire Rocky Mountain region. I literally just finalized a $2.1 million exclusive contract with her this very morning. $2.1 million. That massive number hung suspended over the living room like a primed hand grenade. My father took a physical step backward, his face turning an alarming shade of gray. $2 million? That is significantly more than my entire company's annual net profit. Your daughter has single-handedly constructed something absolutely remarkable. Victoria continued smoothly, seemingly entirely unbothered by the psychological devastation she was actively inflicting. I rigorously studied her extensive profile in Forbes magazine this past October. It is an absolutely inspiring journey. Her visionary approach to corporate sustainability is arguably years ahead of the current industry standard. Forbes? Sarah choked out, her voice cracking violently. Lily was featured in Forbes magazine? Grace's fingers were already flying across her screen, rapidly pulling up a Google search. Oh yes. Good lord, here it is. The October issue. Lily Septon, the quiet force behind stellar events. There is an entire multi-page spread. Grace aggressively spun the phone around, shoving the screen into the faces of everyone standing nearby. There was the massive photograph of me standing powerfully in my executive office, arms crossed, staring down the camera lens with absolute authority. Professional, wealthy, confident, wildly successful. Everything my toxic family had spent a decade convincing themselves I could never be. Like moths to a flame, more elite guests began drifting over from the edges of the room, drawn in by the explosive commotion. Phones were quickly whipped out. Guests began aggressively Googling my name, passing screens back and forth and reading specific excerpts out loud to the shocked crowd. It says right here she currently employs 23 full-time staff members, one man shouted. Her agency reportedly cleared over $4 million in gross revenue just this calendar year, a woman gasped. Listen to this quote, it's incredible, another guest read aloud. Quote, I believe in showing up, not showing off. Unquote. My mother stood completely paralyzed dead in the center of the chaos, physically watching her carefully curated, totally fake Christmas reality violently disintegrate into ash. Why in the world didn't she ever tell us any of this? Margaret whispered weakly, seemingly talking to no one in particular. Well, perhaps, Victoria interjected, her voice dripping with lethal politeness. You simply never bothered to ask her. The heavy silence that followed that statement was absolutely apocalyptic. Grace Thompson, the exact same woman who had loyally attended the Septon holiday dinners for 15 straight years, cleared her throat and spoke up next. You know, Margaret, I always privately wondered about Lily. Every single time I came here, she was trapped in that kitchen. Always sweating, always working. And you barely ever spoke her name. Whenever I directly asked you how she was doing, you immediately changed the subject like you were ashamed of her. Several other affluent guests began slowly nodding their heads, murmuring in loud agreement. She always seemed incredibly capable, Grace pressed on. Do you remember those phenomenal stuffed mushrooms she handmade years ago? Best I ever tasted in my life. I really should have known she was destined to build an empire with that kind of talent. Harold Thompson, my father's primary business partner, angrily pushed his way to the front of the circle. Richard, I had absolutely zero idea your daughter was the CEO of a $4 million enterprise. Why on God's green earth would you actively hide that from me? We could have been doing highly lucrative business together for years. My father stood there completely mute. He had no excuse. He had no defense. Meanwhile, Sarah had transitioned from ghost white to a bright, furious crimson. She was white-knuckling her wine glass so hard I'm surprised the crystal didn't shatter in her hand. Her pristine, perfect daughter facade was rapidly melting into a puddle. She never explicitly told us anything. Sarah spat defensively. She completely hid it. She just happily let us assume that she was. Assume that she was what, exactly? Victoria interrupted, cocking a single, razor-sharp eyebrow. Assume that she was an utter failure? Assume that she was unimportant? Assume that her life's work possessed zero value. Sarah's mouth snapped shut audibly. Victoria Caldwell slowly scanned the horrified faces of my family, utilizing the exact same cold, calculating assessment she used to dissect failing corporations. I had the distinct privilege of meeting Lily this morning. She was fiercely professional, obsessively prepared, and honestly, one of the most terrifyingly impressive young executives I have ever encountered in my career. We sat and negotiated for nearly an hour before we signed the paperwork. Victoria paused, letting the silence stretch out for maximum impact. And yet, She never once mentioned she was biologically related to any of you. That was the final, fatal blow. My mother's hand was shaking so violently she had to place her wine glass on a nearby table to keep from spilling it. She didn't tell you that we were her actual family? I explicitly asked her if she possessed any relation to the prominent Denver Septons, Victoria stated flatly. She looked me dead in the eye and told me it was simply a very common name. The horrifying implication slammed into the room with the force of a freight train. Lily hadn't proudly claimed them. Lily actively did not want her prestigious brand associated with their toxic dysfunction. She had intentionally kept her massive success a total secret, not because she was ashamed of herself, but because she was profoundly ashamed of them. "Oh my dear God," Grace whispered, her eyes going wide as a massive realization finally connected. That is exactly why she isn't here tonight. That is why there is absolutely no dinner prepared. She was down in Miami finalizing a $2 million mega contract. While you arrogant fools literally expected a corporate CEO to sit here and cook a massive dinner for 25 people like the hired help, Harold finished the thought, his tone dripping with absolute disgust. My father's face rapidly shifted from pale gray to a throbbing, furious purple. "Now you all wait just a damn minute. This is a private, internal family matter." "Is it really?" Victoria shot back, her voice turning to pure ice. "Because from where I am currently standing, it appears that you have spent a decade actively treating a wildly successful business mogul like an unpaid scullery maid. And when she finally landed an opportunity that actually mattered, an exclusive partnership with my billion-dollar corporation, no less, you genuinely expected her to prioritize baking your pathetic dinner rolls over securing her financial empire." The silence that blanketed the room was absolute. Somewhere deep in the background, a soft rendition of Silent Night continued to play through the hidden speakers. The irony was almost cinematic. Victoria gracefully pivoted toward my parents, offering a tight, utterly devastating corporate smile that didn't even come close to reaching her eyes. "I believe I fully understand now exactly why Lily desperately wanted to hide her connection to you people. Please do give her my warmest regards whenever you finally manage to speak to her. And please do thank her on my behalf. If she hadn't boldly chosen to step away from this horrific dinner party, we might never have crossed paths today." Victoria casually set down her completely untouched glass of wine. "Now, if you will kindly excuse me, I have a very early flight to Switzerland to catch in the morning." "Margaret, Richard, thank you so much for the invitation. It has been incredibly illuminating." Victoria Caldwell turned on her heel and glided right out the front door without ever looking back. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind her, and the entire living room instantly erupted into sheer chaos. Elite guests splintered into tight, gossiping clusters, loudly whispering about massive Forbes articles, million-dollar corporate takeovers, and the phantom daughter the Septon family had tried to bury. My mother physically collapsed into a heavy armchair, her precious Christmas fantasy completely reduced to rubble. My father aggressively retreated to his private study, violently slamming the heavy wooden door behind him. Sarah sprinted up the main staircase, presumably to scream into a pillow or cry, or likely both. And simultaneously, safely inside my secure apartment across town, I was happily lounging on my velvet couch, shoveling pad thai into my mouth and binge-watching Netflix, completely and blissfully oblivious to the absolute revolution that had just detonated inside my parents' living room. I wouldn't learn the full, unvarnished truth of the carnage until the morning of December 26th, when Grace Thompson bypassed my parents entirely and called my cell phone directly. "Lily," Grace began, her voice heavy with emotion. "I formally owe you a massive apology. I have known your family for 15 straight years, and I never once bothered to pull you aside and ask what you actually did for a living. That was incredibly wrong of me." "It is perfectly fine, Grace," I replied softly. "You are definitely not the person who should be issuing apologies today." "Maybe not. But I desperately need you to know exactly what Victoria Caldwell said to your parents' faces at that party. She called you one of the most impressive executives she has ever met. Every single person in that room heard it. The entire social circle knows the truth now." Grace took a deep, shuddering breath. Your parents have an insurmountable amount of explaining to do, and I can promise you, this community is not going to let them sweep this under the rug anytime soon. A microscopic, incredibly petty corner of my brain felt a rush of pure, unadulterated satisfaction. But the vast majority of my soul just felt profoundly tired. "Thank you so much for telling me all of this, Grace," I said sincerely. "Of course." "And Lily? A massive congratulations on locking down that contract. You have clearly bled for this. You deserve every single ounce of your massive success." Not a single blood relative had ever spoken those words to me in my entire life. It ultimately took a near stranger to say them first, following the sequence of events as they unfolded. Strangely enough, that chaotic energy heavily contrasted with how I spent my final evening in Florida before flying home. Let's rewind for a brief second to that warm Christmas night in Miami. I had been sitting peacefully out on the private balcony of my suite at the Fontainebleau, watching the bright moon paint thick, glowing silver stripes across the dark Atlantic Ocean. I had ordered an extravagant room service spread, a thick, rare steak, beautifully roasted root vegetables, and a heavy glass of expensive red wine. The thick leather folder containing the Meridian contract rested on the table right next to me. Its physical weight was incredibly grounding. My cell phone had been completely powered down since my plane touched down. I knew the storm was raging, but with the massive contract finally signed and my corporate future firmly locked into place, I finally felt mentally equipped to handle it. I wasn't ready to blindly forgive them. I definitely wasn't ready for a tearful reconciliation. I was simply ready to establish absolute clarity. I held down the power button and watched the terrifying flood of notifications violently crash onto my screen. 15 missed phone calls, 32 aggressive text messages, 6 frantic voicemails. Every single one originated from blood relatives I currently possessed zero desire to interact with. I began reading the texts from my mother. "Mom, 6:47 p.m. Call me immediately." "Mom, 7:23 p.m. Lily, this is incredibly serious. Victoria Caldwell literally knows about you." "Mom, 8:15 p.m. How could you intentionally humiliate us like this in front of our friends?" "Mom, 9:02 p.m. Please pick up the phone. We desperately need to talk." Then, the venom from my sister. "Sarah, 7:45 p.m. Are you actually kidding me right now?" "Sarah, 8:30 p.m. You intentionally let us look like absolute idiots in front of 25 elite people." "Sarah, 10:17 p.m. Mom is literally having a nervous breakdown on the floor. Are you happy now?" And finally, my father. "Dad, 9:45 p.m. Lily, we need to sit down and seriously discuss what transpired tonight. This is absolutely not how a family should operate." I sat back and read through the entire digital barrage without feeling a single spike of emotion. The toxic manipulation was so glaringly, pathetically obvious now. It was a masterclass in aggressive guilt trips, blatant blame shifting, and a complete, utter absence of personal accountability. Not a single message congratulated me on landing the $2 million deal. Not a single text acknowledged that I had secretly built a multi-million-dollar empire right under their noses. Not a single word of apology for 15 solid years of treating me like worthless garbage. Suddenly, the phone rang in my hand. It was Marcus. "Hey," I answered, my voice steady. "Merry Christmas, boss," he chuckled warmly. "How are you holding up in the trenches?" "Honestly, considerably better than I ever expected." I took a slow sip of my red wine. The contract is completely locked. Victoria Caldwell is an incredible force of nature. I actually heard she fired off an email to our corporate team right after the meeting wrapped. She claimed I was somehow even more impressive in person than I was on paper. Marcus paused, a smirk audible in his voice. "Well, I also heard some highly entertaining rumors regarding what went down in Denver last night. News travels incredibly fast in this industry." Victoria's executive assistant forwarded a quick message to our team. Apparently, the legendary Septon family Christmas dinner turned into quite the spectacular dumpster fire. I let out a loud, genuine laugh. It was probably the first real laugh I had experienced in weeks. I can only begin to imagine the chaos. "Lily, listen to me closely," Marcus said, his tone turning dead serious. "You made the exact right call yesterday. You bravely chose your career, you chose your company, and you ultimately chose your future. You do not owe those people a single damn thing. I know, I replied softly. And the crazy part was, for the very first time in my life, I actually believed it. After hanging up with Marcus, I popped open my laptop and began drafting an email. It wasn't an emotional, tear-soaked rant. It wasn't an aggressive list of petty accusations. It was a crystal clear, hyper-professional statement of facts, the exact type of icy correspondence I would routinely send to a breach of contract vendor. To Richard Septon, Margaret Septon, Sarah Septon. Subject: regarding Christmas Eve and moving forward. I typed out the words deliberately, carefully weighing the impact of every single sentence. I officially signed an exclusive corporate contract with Meridian Holdings yesterday morning valued at $2.1 million. This is precisely why I was not present at your Christmas dinner. For the past 15 years, I have aggressively cooked, cleaned, and served at every single family gathering while my actual career was mocked and dismissed as a pathetic hobby. When I explicitly informed Mom that I had a critical business meeting, she literally laughed in my face. When I attempted to set a basic boundary, I was violently branded as selfish. I am absolutely not selfish for prioritizing my multi-million-dollar business. I am not ungrateful for possessing basic personal standards. I am not a failure simply because my massive success does not fit into your narrow, toxic definition. I will absolutely never apologize for finally choosing myself. I am potentially open to eventually rebuilding our relationship, but that will only happen under highly specific conditions. I will permanently cease to function as the family caterer. I will be fully respected as a successful, equal member of this family. My professional career will be openly acknowledged and celebrated, not hidden away in shame. If you find these strict conditions unacceptable, I completely understand. But I will never, under any circumstances, return to the way things operated before. I will reach out to you when I am emotionally ready to talk. Lily. I meticulously proofread the draft 3 times, tweaked one minor sentence for maximum impact, and forcefully hit send. For a long time, I just sat there staring blindly at the rolling ocean waves. Nobody replied that night. I certainly didn't expect them to. They desperately needed time to process the massive psychological shock, to slowly realize that the pathetic daughter they had permanently relegated to the kitchen had completely outgrown their toxic ecosystem. Marcus was absolutely right. This was a monumental turning point, and not just on a professional level. The ensuing fallout rapidly began on December 26th, sending massive shockwaves through my parents' community like a boulder dropped into a stagnant pond. Grace Thompson publicly posted on her Facebook page that afternoon. She didn't explicitly name names, but every single elite member of their social circle knew exactly who the post was targeting. This particular Christmas, I was taught a profoundly important lesson, Grace wrote. Never blindly underestimate the quiet people in your own family. Sometimes, the most terrifyingly successful person in the room is the exact person nobody bothers to notice. Within hours, that single post racked up nearly 300 likes and dozens of comments. Prominent country club members passively-aggressively tagged my parents, asking pointed, brutal questions about healthy family dynamics and the importance of supporting your children's actual dreams. My mother's phone practically melted down. Wealthy women from her prestigious charity board, her elite book club, and her garden society relentlessly called her under the thin guise of checking in, practically vibrating with gossip regarding the Forbes revelation. I heard a massive rumor that your daughter is quite the corporate powerhouse, one woman snickered. Why on earth did you constantly hide the fact that she was so wealthy? My mother had meticulously spent decades cultivating a pristine, untouchable image, the fiercely devoted wife, the endlessly supportive mother, the flawless pillar of the Denver elite. That pristine image was now completely shattered into a million jagged pieces. My father was simultaneously facing his own brutal corporate reckoning. Harold Thompson, Grace's husband and my dad's most vital business connection, called him directly on the morning of December 27th. Richard, I have been seriously analyzing that new commercial expansion project we recently discussed, Harold stated smoothly. I would very much like to bring in an elite event planning partner to handle the massive launch celebration. Of course, Harold, of course, my father eagerly replied, undoubtedly smelling a massive payday. Who exactly did you have in mind for the job? Your daughter's company. Stellar Events. I spent the morning thoroughly reading her Forbes profile. She is absolutely incredible. Silence on my dad's end. I was really hoping you could quickly facilitate a warm introduction between the two of us, Harold pressed on. I will obviously reach out to her corporate office directly, but I figured leveraging family connections might grease the wheels a bit. My father, the man who had never, not once in 15 years, introduced me to a single solitary business contact, was now being forcefully asked to beg me for a favor. I will. See exactly what I can do, my dad choked out. But Harold wasn't stupid enough to wait on my father. He immediately tracked down my direct corporate email and fired off a highly lucrative formal inquiry that exact same afternoon. I personally responded within 2 hours, attaching a massive, premium-priced proposal. Richard Septon was no longer the all-powerful gatekeeper. Sarah's unfolding situation was significantly more complex and, honestly, 100 times more satisfying. She had aggressively spent the last 6 months trying to court Meridian Holdings, desperately hoping to secure Dad's company as a primary supplier for their upcoming Denver skyscraper developments. She had ruthlessly attended their networking mixers, fired off strategic corporate emails, and loudly positioned herself as the untouchable face of the Septon brand. None of her networking mattered anymore. On December 28th, Sarah confidently fired off an email to Victoria Caldwell's private office, officially requesting a formal follow-up meeting regarding their potential synergy. Victoria's executive assistant fired back an icy, boilerplate response within 20 minutes. Miss Caldwell's schedule is currently fully committed through the end of Q1. For any future vendor inquiries, please direct your generic correspondence to our standard online vendor application portal. Translation: you are absolutely nobody, and you are no longer a priority. Sarah had coasted for years on the comfortable wave of blind parental favoritism, arrogantly assuming her fabricated status as the successful, golden daughter was permanently secure. Now, in the terrifying span of merely 72 hours, her entire fake identity had been completely obliterated. I didn't actively revel in her misery, but I would be lying through my teeth if I claimed I felt a shred of pity. As for me, my professional momentum was completely unstoppable. By the evening of December 30th, I had aggressively locked down 3 massive new client meetings for the month of January. I had literally received 2 incredibly lucrative buyout offers from massive competing agencies, both of which I promptly threw in the trash. I was even cold-called by a prominent New York literary agent who heavily insisted my gritty story of female entrepreneurial perseverance would translate into a massive best-selling memoir. I sat down with Marcus and projected a staggering 35% total revenue increase for 2025, fueled almost entirely by the raw prestige of the Meridian contract alone. Marcus perfectly encapsulated the surreal reality during our morning video sync. Lily, you have been quietly bleeding for this exact moment for 12 brutal years. Every single sleepless night, every screaming bridezilla, every massive personal sacrifice, it all led exactly to this point. You have entirely earned this. I finally believed him. But the most shocking twist in this entire saga materialized from the absolute last place I ever expected. On the morning of December 29th, a thick envelope arrived at my apartment via expensive overnight courier. It wasn't an email. It wasn't a text. It was a physical, handwritten letter. The return address printed on the corner was my parents' estate. The sloppy, aggressive handwriting belonged exclusively to my father. I stood in my kitchen and almost threw it directly into the trash can. What possible string of words could he offer that would magically erase a decade and a half of absolute neglect? But basic human curiosity eventually won the battle. I ripped it open. Dear Lily, it read. I have spent the entirety of the last 4 days desperately trying to wrap my brain around how I was blind to what was standing right in front of my face. You actively built a massive company. A very real, very lucrative company with actual employees, heavy-hitting clients, and annual revenue that vastly exceeds my own. And I was completely oblivious because I never possessed the decency to ask. I constantly lied to myself, claiming I was a good father. I told myself that I fully supported both of my daughters equally. But the brutal truth is, I only ever saw exactly what I wanted to see. I fully expected Sarah to be the winner, so I constantly manufactured her successes. I fully expected you to fail, so failure was all I allowed myself to see. I was wrong, Lily. I was deeply, horribly, embarrassingly wrong. I am absolutely not asking for your forgiveness. I know I have done absolutely nothing to earn it. But I desperately need you to know that I finally see you now. I see the incredible empire you have built. And I am proud, belatedly, completely inadequately, but entirely genuinely proud of the terrifyingly brilliant woman you have become. If you ever find it in your heart to be willing, I would deeply appreciate the chance to sit down and actually learn about stellar events. To truly understand the scope of your work. To actually get to know my own daughter. Whatever you ultimately decide, I will respect your boundaries completely. Your father, Richard. I stood perfectly still and read that heavy letter 3 times in a row. Then I quietly placed it down on the cold granite counter and began brewing a pot of coffee. I was absolutely not ready to text him back. A few paragraphs of ink didn't magically wipe away 15 years of treating me like an indentured servant. Empty words do not erase cruel actions. But it was a genuine starting line. I want to quickly pause the story right here for just 1 second. If my journey is actively resonating with you, if you have ever felt deeply overlooked, severely undervalued, or completely taken for granted by the exact people who are supposed to unconditionally love you the most, please take 1 small second to hit that subscribe button and turn your notifications on. And I really want to know your opinion. Tell me down in the comments below, do you genuinely believe I should eventually forgive my family, or should I maintain these absolute, ironclad boundaries forever? Now, let me bring you to the conclusion of the story. It was New Year's Eve, December 31st, 2024. I was standing barefoot near my massive apartment window, quietly watching brilliant fireworks detonate across the freezing downtown Denver skyline. The entire city was practically vibrating with loud celebrations, counting down the final ticking minutes of a year that had violently reconstructed my entire existence. My cell phone was sitting face down on the kitchen island, completely silent for the first time in weeks. I had aggressively instituted new digital boundaries, permanently muting toxic family group chats, instantly declining phone calls I didn't possess the emotional bandwidth for, and strictly responding only on my personal timeline, never theirs. The heavy letter from my father still rested exactly where I had abandoned it next to the coffee maker. I must have reread his words 24 times over the past 48 hours. Every single time my eyes scanned the ink, a totally different emotion flared up. Raw anger, crushing sadness, cautious hope, extreme skepticism. Finally, as the clock struck exactly 11:47 p.m., I picked up the phone and dialed his private number. He snatched it up before the first ring even finished. Lily. Hi, Dad. A massive, heavy silence stretched between us. Muffled in the background, I could clearly hear my mother's frantic voice demanding to know who he was talking to. He completely ignored her. "Thank you so much for calling me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I genuinely didn't expect. I honestly wasn't sure if you ever would." "I almost didn't," I replied, keeping my vocal tone perfectly steady and strictly professional. "But I have spent the last few days deeply considering what the future looks like." "So have I, Lily. So have I. I am potentially willing to attempt to rebuild some kind of relationship with you," I stated firmly. "But it will absolutely never go back to the way things were." "I fully understand that. I need you to know I am completely serious, Dad. There will be absolutely 0 instances of me acting as the family caterer. There will be 0 tolerance for dismissing my massive career. There will be 0 instances of treating me like I am completely invisible while Sarah gets paraded around in the spotlight." I took a deep, shaky breath to steady my racing heart. If I agree to attend future family events, I am walking through that door strictly as an honored guest. As a complete equal. Never again as the hired staff. "That is fair," he whispered. "That is more than fair. And furthermore, I demand that you actually take a genuine interest in my life. You don't get to just lazily assume you know me. You are going to ask me about my multi-million-dollar company. You are going to ask about my massive clients. You are going to ask about my professional goals. You are going to be genuinely interested. Another agonizingly long pause hung over the line. When he finally spoke again, his voice cracked with deep regret. I really should have been doing exactly that for your entire life. Yes, Dad. You really should have. The thick silence stretched between the two of us, practically vibrating with 15 agonizing years of painful things left completely unsaid. But miraculously, for the first time in my memory, the quiet didn't feel hostile or dangerous. It just felt incredibly, deeply tired. Your mother, my dad began, carefully choosing his words, is severely struggling to process all of this. She is absolutely not ready to openly admit that she was completely wrong. Not yet. I am well aware. I had received absolutely 0 letters from Margaret. No emotional voicemails. Just one single, violently brittle text message that simply read, "Happy New Year. Hope you are well." It was pure, performative politeness desperately attempting to mask her toxic, boiling resentment. "Please, just give her some time," my dad pleaded softly. "I have already given her 15 years, I shot back. He possessed absolutely 0 defense for that. "I will come over for dinner next week," I finally conceded. "Sunday night. But I am strictly arriving as a guest. Somebody else can figure out the cooking. I will order some takeout from that premium Italian place you used to love." It was a microscopic concession, but it was a definitive starting block. After we finally ended the call, I walked back over to the massive window and silently watched the digital clock relentlessly tick its way toward midnight. In just a handful of seconds, it would officially be 2025. A brand new year. A completely blank slate. Victoria Caldwell's massive signature was permanently inked on my contract. Harold Thompson's highly lucrative partnership proposal was sitting unread in my corporate inbox. A journalist from Entrepreneur magazine was actively begging my assistant for an exclusive sit-down interview. My corporate empire was terrifyingly poised to absolutely dominate the industry this year. And my toxic family, the exact people who had aggressively overlooked me, belittled me, and treated me like trash for over a decade, finally saw me for exactly who I was. Not because I had thrown a massive tantrum and forced them to look. Not because I had screamed until my throat bled, or violently fought them, or desperately demanded their validation. They finally saw me because I possessed the sheer power to completely walk away. Because I boldly chose to prioritize myself. Because I ultimately allowed my massive, undeniable success to scream infinitely louder than any petty argument ever could. There is an old, famous quote that I absolutely love. I can't even remember who originally coined it, but it goes, "The best revenge is massive success." But sitting here today, I honestly don't even view it as revenge anymore. The concept of revenge implies that your brain is still hyper-focused on the toxic people who damaged you. It implies that you are still actively measuring your personal worth against their broken, twisted standards. It implies you are still desperately trying to prove your value to them. What I executed wasn't a petty act of revenge. It was a profound act of self-respect. The brilliant fireworks outside my window finally reached their deafening, explosive crescendo exactly at the stroke of midnight. My phone vibrated against the counter with a new text from Marcus. "Happy New Year, boss. 2025 is going to be absolutely incredible." I smiled, picked up the phone, and typed back, "You're exactly right. It already is." Then I opened up a completely blank digital document on my heavy laptop and started officially planning. I wasn't mapping out my next massive corporate gala. I wasn't strategizing for my next million-dollar negotiation. I was methodically typing out my strict personal boundaries, explicitly defining them with the exact same ruthless, professional clarity I would utilize to draft a legally binding corporate agreement. Number 1. I will exclusively attend family gatherings as an honored guest, never again as an unpaid servant. Number 2. I will absolutely not tolerate blatant disrespect cleverly disguised as family humor. Number 3. I will never, under any circumstances, apologize for aggressively prioritizing my career over their comfort. Number 4. I will be strictly treated as a complete equal, or I will immediately remove myself from the room and refuse to participate. Number 5. I will kindly respond to genuine, healthy attempts at emotional connection, and I will coldly ignore toxic manipulation. Number 6. My time, my energy, and my peace are incredibly valuable assets. I will spend them accordingly. They were remarkably simple rules. Crystal clear, undeniable expectations. The exact type of ironclad boundaries I honestly should have implemented 15 agonizing years ago. But here is the ultimate lesson I have learned through this entire nightmare. It is literally never too late. You are never too old, you are never too far down the wrong path, and you are never too deeply entrenched in toxic family dynamics to completely shatter the cycle. The exact second you wake up and finally decide that you deserve better is the exact second your entire universe radically shifts. My parents are obviously not perfect people. They may honestly never fully grasp the true magnitude of what they did wrong, or fully comprehend the massive psychological toll it extracted from me. My sister Sarah may go to her grave refusing to ever issue a genuine apology. But the beautiful truth is, that is officially no longer my problem to solve. My only problem now is actively building the exact life I want to live. My only focus is expanding the massive career I have violently earned, and carefully nurturing the healthy relationships I actually choose to keep in my circle. And that is exactly what I am going to do. So, that is my complete story. A brutal, 15-year journey from acting as the invisible family servant to ruthlessly signing a $2 million mega contract while my entire family pathetically scrambled to survive without me. If you are watching this and you have ever felt deeply overlooked, casually dismissed, or completely taken for granted by the exact people who are supposed to champion you, I desperately need you to hear this. Your massive success is sitting out there waiting for you. It absolutely does not require their toxic approval. It does not require their pathetic acknowledgement. The only thing it requires is for you to finally push all your chips to the center of the table and bet completely on yourself. Thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you for sticking with me all the way to the end of this incredibly personal journey. If you have ever been treated like a ghost by the exact people who should love you the most, I want you to look in the mirror and know that you deserve absolute respect. You deserve to be fully seen. Please hit that subscribe button to join this channel, and make sure to check out the description box down below for even more powerful stories about aggressively setting boundaries and discovering your true worth. And before you click away, leave a comment down below and tell me, have you ever been forced to completely choose yourself over the toxic expectations of your own family? Until next time, take care of yourselves.